I mean, women paying off smears at the local doctor because they can't afford, the 35, 40, 50 bucks that's needed to keep themselves well. I mean, we are not a third world country, but some of the stuff that's going on, it does make you wonder.
And Paul says, we will order from the wait staff every single time. We've had wonderful dialogue. And my question to you is, you can email me, thepanel@rnz.co.nz. Should I keep Pratik on as our taste tester? Yes or no? Support Pratik? You can email me if you'd like. It's been a wonderful panel. Ali, Jeremy, I'm Wallace Chapman. I am back tomorrow, 3:45. See you then. Checkpoint with Lisa Owen is next.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere ake nei, a much-loved son and brother. The death of a Whangārei Boys High student in a caving accident prompts an outpouring of grief and serious questions from parents and the community. WorkSafe's investigating, and Checkpoint can reveal it visited the school in March following another serious accident. We'll have the latest. Alcohol laws are being tweaked so pubs can stay open odd hours during the Rugby World Cup. Cheers to that, or not. West Auckland residents caught in the rinse and repeat of yet more flooding, and book a bunk bed high in the sky. Air New Zealand launches a world first, but is it good for the world? You can watch us live on the RNZ website and Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Evie Ashton. The whānau of a Whangārei Boys High School student who died in Abbey Caves yesterday has thanked everyone for their love and support, but asked for privacy. The Year 11 teenager was one of 15 pupils and a teacher and instructor who were on the local caving trip. Ashley McCall is in Whangārei.
Multiple investigations are underway into how the tragedy happened. The principal of Whangārei Boys High School won't answer questions about why the trip went ahead in bad weather, saying she can't provide answers right now out of respect for the dead boy's family. Karen Gilbert-Smith says the school community is devastated by what's happened, and the impact is being felt widely by the school staff and students. The boy is described as a much-loved and treasured son and brother. Kia ore tare tare, Abbey Caves will be closed till further notice.
Auckland Council's budget shortfall for the next financial year is expected to reach $375 million, including $50 million in storm costs. Mayor Wayne Brown warned a closed-door workshop today that without savings, that would equate to a rate rise of more than 20%, but Councillor Alf Filipaina isn't convinced.
It just puts it down to scaremongering because we haven't discussed anything around a rate rise. We were just given that figure if the levers weren't utilised.
The Mayor's proposed budget is due at the end of this month. Auckland Emergency Management is urging residents to prepare for the probability of more rain after yesterday's downpours. A local state of emergency remains in place and inspectors have been out assessing damage across the city. Emergency Management says residents can expect gusting winds with a cold snap later this week. About 50,000 women have missed out on breast cancer screening in the past 2 years because of COVID disruptions. The figure is from a damning national report into breast screening that calls the system racist and recommends 26 changes. It says Pasifika women are most likely to have missed out because of the disruptions, and Māori women are less likely to get mammograms on time in general. The Whatu Order has announced a new national screening register and a breast screening action plan. The Commerce Commission has launched an investigation into the multi-billion-dollar retirement village sector following allegations over unfair practices. The head of Consumer New Zealand, John Duffy, says his organisation and the Retirement Villages Residents Association have had long-standing complaints about the clauses in some contracts.
Obviously, they need to be able to make a profit, and that, as long as that profit's reasonable, there shouldn't be an issue with that. But really, the flip side of the argument they're running is we can't run this industry unless we can treat residents unfairly, and I don't think anyone would buy into that.
Te Pāti Māori is laughing off National's decision to rule out working with them after the election. National leader Christopher Luxon says Te Pāti Māori is radical and separatist. Te Pāti Māori co-leader Debbie Ngarewa-Packer says they take pride in being pro-Māori and mana motuhake focused.
I think he has to grab his voters. They're all after the same voters. It's hard to differentiate between who's Labour and who's National at the moment. But the reality is that we know who we are, and we have to really focus on that.
Te Pāti Māori says it remains open to discussions with any party committed to a tiriti-centric Aotearoa. The High Court trial for two people accused of murdering Christchurch woman Angela Blackmore in 1995 has been aborted. The 21-year-old was stabbed to death in her home while her 2-year-old son slept. Jean Edwards reports.
The jury trial of David Hawken and Rebecca Wright-Meldrum began last week, but this afternoon Justice Cameron Mander told the court it must be abandoned in the interests of justice. He told the jury material has come to hand that lawyers need to review. Mr Hawken and Ms Wright-Meldrum deny any involvement in Ms Blackmore's death. Another man, Jeremy Powell, pleaded guilty to Angela Blackmore's murder 3 years ago and is serving a minimum of 10 years in prison.
To sport now, and the New Zealand and Japanese rugby unions have signed a 4-year deal to play regular tests in an attempt to grow the game in the Asia-Pacific region. The arrangement will also see Super Rugby teams playing against Japan's League One sides in a move to bring the competitions closer. New Zealand Rugby CEO Mark Robinson says there is benefit for both countries.
I think one of the key principles of what we're doing is looking to grow value, but in partnership here. So we recognise that Japan need to be at the table and able to grow their game here domestically and also have opportunities to do well themselves internationally, and we're very supportive of that.
The deal begins next year and could be extended beyond 2027. And New Zealand Cricket Chief Executive David White is stepping down. White was appointed to the position in February 2012 and says it's the right time to pass the leadership baton on to a fresh set of hands. He says the game is in a strong place in Aotearoa, from grassroots to international level.
I'm very proud of what we've all achieved over those 12 years. We're in a very strong financial position, solid balance sheet and long-term commercial agreements in place. And also the Black Cats are strong, women's cricket is healthy, and our high-performance program is producing excellence.
David White will leave in August. That's the news.
Tragedy follows a school caving trip.
Searchers were sadly able to locate a body and they recovered that late yesterday.
A whānau in mourning.
It's devastating for our whānau, for the support services that have been working around the clock to find this tamaiti, and for our wider school community in Whangārei as a whole.
And in rain-soaked regions, flood fatigue sets in.
It's really hard. The anxiety, financial pressure is just too much.
News as it happens, Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
We're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. In the west, from Northland to Kapiti, also Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Showers, some heavy with possible thunderstorms and hail, gradually easing from Waikato southwards tomorrow. Gisborne to Waididapa, also Wellington and Marlborough, mainly fine with the odd shower. Cloud and showers spreading north again tomorrow, some may be heavy. For Nelson, showers spreading from the west today, clearing to fine tomorrow morning. Bulla and Westland, showers, possibly heavy and thundery with hail, clearing from southern Westland this evening and elsewhere tomorrow morning, then fine weather. Canterbury, occasional showers with snow to about 600 metres overnight, clearing from the south tomorrow, apart from a few showers near the coast. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, occasional rain or showers, with snow above 400 metres, easing tomorrow. And looking at Rekohu, Chatham Islands, showers, some heavy and possibly thundery, easing later tomorrow. The time is 7 minutes past 5. I will have traffic news and headlines for you at 5:20.
Nā mihi Evie, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A much-loved son and brother who died on a school caving trip. There's been an outpouring of grief in Whangārei, where the 15-year-old was a student at Whangārei Boys High School. The caves that claimed his life are just a 10-minute drive from the school. The whānau of the young man has thanked people for their love and support, and rescuers for bringing back his body. 15 students, a teacher and an instructor were on the trip when the tragedy struck. Multiple investigations are underway into how it happened, and parents and locals want answers. The principal of Whangārei Boys High School says she is not in a position to provide answers about the caving tragedy out of respect for the whānau of the boy who died. Ashley McCall and cameraman Angus Drever are in Whangārei.
Off limits today. The Abbey Caves entrance closed off to the public after a young life was claimed in there yesterday. It was a late-night recovery mission helped by specialist equipment brought up from Auckland to continue the search after dark last night. Hapu Kai Kōrero Huhana Linden was there as the boy was pulled out of the cave last night. She believes when trouble struck, the school group was stuck in the cave for a time and the boy got separated from the rest. When rescue teams arrived, the waters were high inside the cave. Huhana Linden and the hapu met with the whānau yesterday and hugged them at the site.
You have no words to express to the whānau, and it was a still night. Following the rain and the storms, it was quiet. The ability as whānau, as the rescue support services, and us as with our kaumātua to mihi and have karakia. It was a really beautiful night with deep tears and aroha for our whānau.
Police Northland District Commander Superintendent Tony Hill would not go into detail on where the boy's body was found inside the cave.
So he was still found within the cave system as such, but I'm not prepared to speculate or give comment to exactly whereabouts they were or how far it was from where he was last seen.
We spoke to parents of students at Whangārei Boys High School. A mother whose Year 11 son knew the boy who died says she feels for the staff involved.
I'm just really sorry that everyone's going through this. I'm really sorry that it happened. I really feel for the teachers. I feel for the school. I just feel for everyone, and I just wish it never happened. And no judgment at the moment until we know the circumstances.
Another mother says there's a lot of questions to be asked, but love and respect is still needed in this hard time.
It's pretty heartbreaking. You know, your kid goes to school and you think, I trust that good decisions are going to be made and it's going to be all fine. And then it's something like that can happen and your kid doesn't come home.
Locals in Whangārei are perplexed why the school trip went ahead.
I think that the teacher was stupid for taking the children out in the weather, especially caving. It's real dangerous.
I think he should roll. Everyone was doing what they thought was best at the time, I'm sure.
It's very bad and it will be sad because if I have a child missing, I will be crazy.
It should never, ever happen. If it was my 15-year-old son, I'd be devastated.
Superintendent Tony Hill says the incident will be fully investigated.
We obviously will be doing an investigation on behalf of the coroner for that. They'll understand that WorkSafe is doing an investigation as well, and the school are most likely to run their own investigation. So all of those investigations will have a focus on culpability and blame.
Kia ore tare tare Abbey Caves had a rāhui placed on it this morning and will be closed till further notice.
Our reporter Ashley McCall joins us now from Whangārei. Kia ora Ashley, what more can you tell us?
Tēnā koe, Lisa. Well, we understand that at the moment inside the school there is a board meeting going on, and this started at 5 p.m. We also understand, or can confirm, that the school's principal is in attendance.
And what has the school been saying today?
Well, the school released a statement earlier saying that, the principal commented saying that she realises there are a lot of questions that people want answered from this tragedy, but as you noted at the top of the intro from my story, that because she wants to respect the whānau, she isn't going to comment. The statement further says that this has had a massive impact on the school's community and has been felt widely by both students and staff. So what will happen next is that there will be a full investigation by both WorkSafe and the New Zealand Police, which the school says it will of course comply with. But it goes on to say that it will be business as usual, with its main focus to support the students, staff and of course the boys' whānau.
And Ashley, what's the community got planned?
Well, this hasn't been set in stone yet, but I was speaking to Huhana Linden earlier today, who says that she wants to help organise a wider community karakia for everyone. She says that it's only right that everyone comes together and mourns this loss with each other. So earlier today, though, there was a vigil held at the Anglican Church where people were invited to come along, light a candle and just take a moment to reflect. What's also happening in the community is that there's also a Give a Little page, and the last I checked half an hour ago, it was almost up to about $30,000.
Thank you for the update, Ashley. That's Ashley McCall live from Whangārei. And if you were listening to Ashley's report on radio, the video version of that story will be on our webpage. It's 13 minutes after 5. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. And for more on this story, we're joined by our reporter, Tom Taylor, who's in the studio. Tom, WorkSafe has launched an investigation into this death, but it is not the first time they have been involved with this particular school. What can you tell us?
That's right, Lisa. Yeah. So in board minutes from the 28th of March, less than a couple of months ago, there's a small detail in there that WorkSafe actually visited the school following a serious accident. Now, it doesn't actually say what the nature of that accident was. So Checkpoint spoke with a number of board members and the principal, Karen Gilbert-Smith, all declined interviews, but and also wouldn't comment on the nature of that incident. So we're following up with WorkSafe.
Okay, so as you mentioned there, Checkpoint has tried to contact board members today. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so Checkpoint contacted 4 board members, talked with 2 of them, but like I said, all declined interviews. In previous board meeting minutes, this is going back at least 2 years, there's mention of trips to Waipu, Waitomo, and the Kaimai Ranges, all caving trips. These and these have been approved by the board, but there's no mention in there of the Abbey Caves, and none of these board members were able to elaborate on why the Abbey Caves were not mentioned or signed off as part of these board meetings. So boards of trustees, at the end of the day, they've got responsibility for the health and safety of staff and students at schools. And they can do that in a couple of ways. One of those is through risk analysis management systems, or RAMs. And Whangārei Boys does have these in place for all of the education outside of the classroom trips that they go on. So they've got one specifically for caving, and some of the details in that around the weather, which was such a concern yesterday, and outlining that the teacher in charge of the trip should be checking the weather periodically in the days leading up to a trip like that, and again on the morning, and make a call then on whether such a trip should proceed.
Thank you, Tom. That is Tom Taylor there. And it is 5:15. West Auckland residents are dealing with an all too familiar reality after being hit yet again by severe weather. Fast and ferocious flooding swamped the area yesterday. In the space of a few hours, roads were inundated again. Many have experienced multiple bouts of flooding in the last 2 years, and some are continuing to call for managed retreat from at-risk areas. Our reporter Luca Foreman and cameraman Nick Monroe have the story.
Kintara Drive in the West Auckland suburb of Massey was hit particularly hard again yesterday. Local Matt had to perform a rescue operation when a car was stranded in the floodwaters.
I winched him out and then towed him back around to the school. It's one of the school relievers. Obviously had the car. I don't think she got insurance either, so hopefully I've saved it.
He says the water was lapping around the steering wheel and was rising quickly. Residents say yesterday's rain wasn't as bad as previous floods, but for some of them, this is their 5th time being hit since 2021. Chair of advocacy group West Auckland is Flooding, Lyle Carter, says people are over it.
People are done, eh? And some people may think, well, you know, those people are out of their homes. Imagine how you would feel if you'd seen your house, your home. This isn't just bricks and mortar. This is memories. This is family place. This is where family, the good times and the bad times have happened in family and neighbourhood. And we've got to really hold that in mind.
Carter says it's a tough situation for some families in West Auckland who are still paying mortgages or rent on properties they can't live in.
I couldn't think of families more at risk than those that have been impacted and have been displaced due to floods.
He's urging the government to take bold action on managed retreat. He says rebuilding houses in flood-prone areas equates to fighting a battle against nature, one which residents won't win.
We've got to think future. We've got to think, I've got a 1.5-year-old, we've got to think about her generation. How are we setting up her generation to hopefully be Westies?
Ranui resident Wasima Sheikh managed to stay dry yesterday, but says she dropped her kids at a friend's house because she was worried about the rain.
We thought that if it might flood or something, so just for the safety reason. Lots of nails like sticking on our feet too.
Sheikh's still dealing with the fallout of the anniversary weekend floods. Her carpet and insulation had to be ripped up and her heat pump was damaged. She says it's not an ideal situation heading into winter.
Yeah, I'm worried about June, July, the real winter time, like what's gonna happen.
West Auckland residents left dealing with yet another round of torrential rain and bracing for the next one.
And if you are listening to that on radio, the video version of that filmed by cameraman Nick Monroe will be on our webpage. To the US now, and former US President Donald Trump has been found guilty of sexually abusing a journalist in the 1990s. He has also been found guilty of defaming her by calling her a liar. In the New York civil case, the unanimous jury took less than 3 hours to award E. Jean Carroll almost $8 million. However, the allegation Mr. Trump raped her was rejected. The writer alleged that Donald Trump attacked her in a department store in the 1990s. It's the first time Mr. Trump has been found legally responsible for a sexual assault. The BBC's Nader Tawfiq has been following the developments.
E. Jean Carroll didn't speak as she left the court, but her smile said it all. It took jurors just under 3 hours to rule in her favor. While they did not find that Donald Trump raped her, they did unanimously agree that he sexually abused her and then defamed her when he accused her of being a liar.
For all the women who have been abused across the country, that this trial is a little step forward towards some justice.
He is officially recognized now as a sexual predator.
On social media, Donald Trump denounced the verdict as a disgrace and claimed once more that it was part of a witch hunt against him.
He's strong. He's ready to move forward. He wants to fight this on appeal. Again, he was successful in one appeal before the Second Circuit with Judge Kaplan on Carroll versus Trump, and he thinks he's going to be successful in the second one.
This all began way back in the spring of 1996 during a shopping trip at the upscale Bergdorf Goodman department store. She said Donald Trump recognized her as Elle magazine's advice columnist and enlisted her help to find a gift for another woman. In a fitting room, Donald Trump slammed her against a wall and sexually abused her, a jury found. Donald Trump's lawyer subjected her to a line of questioning that was slammed by some as tone-deaf and shameful. During one exchange, after lawyer Joe Tacopina asked her repeatedly why she didn't scream, E. Jean Carroll said, "I'm not a screamer. You can't beat up on me for not screaming." He replied, "I'm not beating up on you. I'm asking you questions, Miss Carroll." To which she said, "No. Women who come forward, one of the reasons they don't come forward is because they are always asked why you didn't scream. Some women scream, some women don't. It keeps women silent." To bolster Carroll's account, her lawyers called 2 friends who she told about the attack at the time and 2 other women who alleged Donald Trump also sexually assaulted them. They also used Donald Trump's own words to establish this was how he operated, showing the jury this infamous Access Hollywood tape.
You know, I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. You just like, I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
He doubled down on those comments during a taped deposition played in court.
You could do anything. That's what you said, correct?
Well, historically, that's true with stars.
The former president's lawyers, on the other hand, didn't present any witnesses in his defense. And he didn't even show up for the trial. At one point, he was in Scotland opening a golf course. Donald Trump will now pay steep damages. How this affects him politically, if at all, is what many will be closely watching.
It's 22 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaro, we always love to hear from you. Do send us your feedback and let us know your thoughts on anything you've heard on the program this evening. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at checkpointrnz, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time to get to the headlines now. Ko ewe anō tēnei.
A board meeting is currently underway after a caving accident near Whangārei city yesterday. The Whangārei Boys High student became separated when a school party went into the Abbey Caves just before torrential rain hit the area. RNZ reporter Ashley McCall told Checkpoint the wider Whangārei community is rallying around the whānau of the student. She says 2 fundraising pages have been set up for the boys' family. The head of an Auckland business group is concerned the council's plans to plug a $375 million budget hole will have serious ramifications for the city. Heart of the City Chief Executive, Viv Beck, says the city is still emerging from COVID restrictions and she's concerned core services are at risk of being shaved. The Andrea Blackmore murder trial in Christchurch has been aborted to allow lawyers to assess new material that's emerged. David Hawken and Rebecca Wright-Meldrum have denied any involvement in the 1995 death of the 21-year-old who was stabbed to death in her home. Justice Cameron Mander told the jury that in the interests of justice he had to abandon the trial. Building inspectors have so far yellow-stickered 5 Auckland houses from more than 200 inspections following yesterday's storm. Auckland Council's Manager of Building Consents, Ian McCormick, says the work is about ensuring the safety of residents. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic news in Auckland. Auckland Harbour Bridge will be operating with just 4 lanes in each direction during peak traffic tonight because of strong winds between 7 p.m. and 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. And the Bay of Plenty State Highway 2 is now fully open between Whangārei and Taniatua roads after flooding and slips closed the road earlier today. And in the Waikato, State Highway 3 is still closed at Awakino between Maunganui and Awako roads because of an underslip. Our next traffic news and headlines are at 5:40.
Ngā mihi Evie. New Zealand Rugby have announced a hookup with Japan Rugby Union with the promise of more matches between the countries in Japan over the next 4 years. The agreement will see the 2 unions explore strategic and commercial opportunities to grow the game across the Asia-Pacific region. And we're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. So what does this mean for New Zealand players, Felicity?
At the top level for the All Blacks, the Māori All Blacks and the All Blacks 15, it means more games against the Brave Blossoms and the Japan 15. So New Zealand Rugby acknowledges that these will be squeezed into a pretty packed already international calendar. And these games will, the All Blacks haven't really played Japan that often, and in the early days they were quite dominant. But you might remember last year there was that test and it was 38-31. So the All Blacks only just kind of squeezed away with a victory there. So it's kind of seen this combination between the top teams from New Zealand and Japan. It's seen as an opportunity to grow the game. And even, we're on a call a little bit earlier, and the head of the Japan Rugby Football Union sort of cheekily said that one day that Japan hoped to be better than the All Blacks. So they're really putting it out there as an opportunity for them to test themselves against the best, but actually maybe progress their own game as well. This isn't just for the 15-sided game as well, it's for the 7s. So that's the Black Ferns and the All Black 7s could play the Japan 7s teams outside of the World Rugby Series, the 7 Series, which currently happens now. Another opportunity to grow the game as well. 7s is quite popular in Japan. And there's also the closer ties for Super Rugby. So there's the benefit here of Super Rugby teams being able to play the Japan League One teams outside of the traditional Super Rugby window. And as well, several All Blacks have already played in this top flight competition. So that's the likes of Bowden Barrett, Brodie Retallick, Aaron Smith's going to go there next year. But anyone who's hoping for maybe the return of the Sunwolves back into Super Rugby, New Zealand Rugby's CEO Mark Robinson had a little bit of a caveat, and we can hear what he had to say this afternoon.
I think at this stage, they are very happy with the way that League One is developing and growing. We are, continuing to build Super Rugby Pacific. The key opportunity here is for the 2 competitions to work together and to have some form of crossover, but that resulting in a team from Japan coming into Super Rugby is not on the table.
So a little bit unfortunate for that, but it does also impact the women's side of the game. So the women's top players from Japan could come and play in Super Rugby Opiki, our top women's competition here. So that's a little bit like when the men's team, Fumiaki Tanaka and Shinji Ono, came to the Highlanders and played in the men's competition. Something similar could happen either at Super Rugby Opiki level or down at Wharapama level as well. So an opportunity for those players.
Let's switch codes. New Zealand Cricket CEO David White, he's stepping down in August, been in the job 12 years. Was he expected to go, and what's his legacy?
He's presided over quite a rough time for cricket across internationally. So New Zealand Cricket says he's leaving with a legacy of having secured them in a good financial position, the best position that they've ever been in financially. That's right from the grassroots through to the international level as well. And leaving with the women's and girls being more engaged with New Zealand cricket, something that in the past they've probably been criticised for. Over the last decade, there has been a move towards that. And he also oversaw that joint master agreement between the men's and women's professional players, an opportunity and financial opportunity for the women there as well. As I mentioned, that's that kind of the tough world in the last decade. If we think the time that he's been there, it's introduced the World Test Championship, which obviously New Zealand won that opening one, but it's all the complexities that come with playing against every test playing nation. He's also been in part of where there's 3 formats of the game now. Not all the players are wanting to play in every format. So as we see, like the Trent Boult situation, and he sort of presided over some changing captaincies as well. So he's been around for some of the tough times in New Zealand cricket. We're not quite sure what he's going to do next. I'm not quite sure that he knows what he's perhaps going to do next. He's had a long stint in sports administration. So he leaves a different legacy for New Zealand cricket as well.
Thank you, Felicity. Felicity Reid there with sport. In a world first, bunk beds could offer travellers some respite from the torture of sleepless long-haul flights, on Air New Zealand at least. From next year, the national carrier is offering so-called Sky Nest rest pods on its New York and Chicago route. Passengers will be able to book a spot for a snooze. It's part of a $3.5 billion spend on upgrading its fleet and buying new planes over the next 5 years. Well, joining us now is Air New Zealand boss Greg Foran. Kia ora, Greg.
Kia ora. How are you, Lisa?
I'm very well. I need to know more details about this, and please be honest. Is getting into one of these things the equivalent of crawling into a giant, drain pipe or getting into your own coffin? Can you just give us a bit of perspective?
No, much easier than that, Lisa. It's probably more akin to getting into a bunk. So easier picking the middle one than what it is having to go up to either the top one or the bottom one. But pretty easy to get into. If you're 6'2", or smaller, it's pretty good. If you're a bit bigger than that, you might have to bend your legs, but plenty of room in there. Little curtain you can pull across to give yourself some privacy. So it's actually a very comfortable experience.
So how wide? How wide are they? Are they like a standard single bed? Or how would you describe them in terms of space and feel?
Well, the way I would describe it is that I reckon I could sleep better on one of these than what I could on business class in terms of width and length. So the ability to be able to roll over and the length of it is better than what you get in business class.
So there's going to be 6 pods on the planes that these are on, is that right?
That's right. They're going to be up front of economy, just behind premium economy, 6 of them there. And you can sort of take them at a 4-hour stretch, 30 minutes in between, so we can change the sheets and do all those sort of things. And we'll do more work on the pricing, but we think it'll be sort of about $400, $600.
Okay, so at the top end of that, you're paying $150 an hour for a nap. Is that good value?
If you're sitting on a plane for 16, 17 hours, I think some customers who have bought the economy seat will say, do you know, versus paying for premium economy or business class, I don't need all that comfort for the entire length, but if I could just get a decent nap on the way, I think we'll have a lot of people taking that up, but we'll wait and see.
Now, you described the logistics of getting into these things. So, are you going to have higher prices on the ones that are easier access? If you're in a lower bunk, is it going to be more expensive or cheaper or all the same?
No, we think we'll run all the same at this stage, really more of an everyday low price. But we'll see what happens. But that's not our intention to run differential pricing.
Okay, so the new layout then, that means you have to get rid of 5 economy seats, right? in order to accommodate the pods, roundabout?
That's right. You've got to take seats out to put this in.
Okay.
First in the world to do it. But, we all run some of the longest flights in the world. And the other thing that's a bit...
Are you there, Greg? I think we've just lost you. Sorry, we just lost you for a second there, Greg. So 5 economy seats have to be removed. Do the pods weigh more than a standard seat?
Pretty comparable.
Okay.
So the weight thing is okay.
So you are going to be flying less passengers, same emissions, same amount of fuel or more with these pods on. So in terms of emissions, it's a higher ratio, isn't it? Because you're taking passengers out of the mix. I mean, how does that fit with your commitment to being greener?
Well, it just means that we have to try a little bit harder on some other areas. And, that's really what this equation works out to be, Lisa. There's always a bit of a compromise between sort of comfort, carbon emissions, weight. But we think being completely pragmatic is not necessarily the right thing for our customers and staff. So what we do is come up with a more balanced approach. And, we like the innovation around this. And just like we saw with the Sky couch that we did a number of years ago, that's worked extremely well. So we think this is another first for New Zealand and a good thing to do.
So, Greg, have you actually tried it, slept in it in situ?
I have tried it. It's obviously not on a plane. I haven't spent the night sleeping in it, but I have certainly climbed in and out a number of times and lain down there for some time. And as I said, I think it's an exceptional piece of innovation.
Okay, buckle up. We're about to hit turbulence. I'm just wondering about the etiquette with these things, right? Wake up times, whether there's more than one person in there, and 3 words, Mile High Club. How are you going to control that?
Well, we have nestiquette, Lisa, just like we have restroom etiquette. And, there's rules that are applied to this to make sure that everyone's safe and secure. And, if there is turbulence, then we've got ways of ensuring that people are safe. There is only one person per bunk, no talking, no listening to loud music, nestiquette. It's
no
going to
talking.
work a treat.
Are you allowed to have snacks in there?
Absolutely not if you're going to munch and crunch and leave crumbs in there for the next person.
Okay, and so what happens if you sleep past, the alarm or however you're going to wake these people up? What do you do?
Well, we're going to have to be very gently ensure that everyone does stick to their 4-hour time slot so that we can then get in there and make the correct change. But as I said, all that's been pulled together, and we call it nestiquette, and our staff are going to be very well trained in how to do this, and I think it's going to be a really great thing for us.
What about the icky factor? What happens with the linens and the pillow and the air, Greg, in there?
Yeah, that all works fine as well. We have top rate air conditioning systems on our plane, and I'm sure everyone will be very well behaved like they are on all our flights now, Lisa.
Good to talk to you, Greg. Thanks for your time. That is Air New Zealand boss Greg Foran there. Now, keen for your feedback on this. He reckons up to $600 for 4 hours. So at top dollar, that's $150 an hour for a snooze on the plane. And it's the equivalent of a bunk bed, he says, that you can manoeuvre yourself into, you can roll over. There's going to be nestiquette as well. All the etiquette you're supposed to follow. 2101 on text. You can tweet us at checkpointrnz, or the email is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And also there is the environmental consequences of that. Fewer passengers, same emissions, same amount of fuel, it seems. Nationals leader Christopher Luxon has unequivocally ruled out working with Te Pāti Māori to form a government after the election. It follows a turbulent period for the parties on the left, with Meka Whaitiri defecting from Labour and pledging allegiance instead to the Māori Party. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
He once called it a parlour game of rule in, rule out. Now Christopher Luxon is very much playing.
Today I've ruled out National coming to any arrangement with Te Pāti Māori and forming a government after this year's election.
National's taken a while to get here. For months, Mr Luxon has danced around the point, saying only that such a deal was highly unlikely. Today came a captain's call, a decision he personally made in the past 24 hours. No way, no how.
I want to be really clear that I'm ruling them out hard.
The declaration comes a day after Te Pāti Māori's co-leaders were turfed from the debating chamber for breaking the rules, conducting an unsanctioned pōwhiri to welcome Labour defector Meka Whaitiri.
What I'm seeing in New Zealand is an absolute coalition of chaos. I'm seeing a government literally fall apart.
Well, it's a great day for te iwi Māori, let me put it that way. What he's done is confirmed that he's not interested in creating a Tiriti Central Aotearoa.
For Rawiri Waititi of Te Pāti Māori, the announcement is hardly a surprise. The party's current iteration is far different from in 2008, when it supported National under John Key. It was already near unthinkable the two parties could work together, given their vastly different positions on Te Tiriti.
We have a Māori party that is pursuing a separatist, more radical agenda. We believe in one person, one vote. We believe that we are all equal citizens and equal under the law.
And Labour and the Greens were more than happy to offer that lesson.
He knows what he's saying. It's intentional, it's lazy and chaotic.
The Māori electorates do operate on the principle of one person, one vote, and I think those who suggest otherwise need to really consider what the message is that they're trying to convey.
The chief message National is trying to convey is that the left are a mess and that their three-headed coalition would be a disaster. Today's declaration allows it to double down on that attack.
That is a very unstable coalition of chaos, as I keep saying.
But current polling predicts a razor-sharp election. A survey out today conducted by Curia gives National and ACT 62 MPs between them, enough to form a government, but only just. Other recent polls suggest they'd need other friends to get over the line. Perhaps New Zealand First.
New Zealand First isn't in Parliament, and we'll talk about that another day.
Look, I'm not talking about what the Labor Party or National Party or any other party's doing, just what my party's doing at the moment.
But New Zealand First is still a long way from the 5% threshold required. Today's result has them on just 2.6. And any coalition involving ACT with New Zealand First could pose its own problems. The two parties' leaders, David Seymour and Winston Peters, are not exactly friendly.
You know, he's fallen out with 3 Prime Ministers, got voted out of 3 electorates, and you want me to make him functional and competent? I mean, who do you think I am, Jesus?
The ACT Party has never ever had a minister inside a cabinet in all of those 30 years. This is rather dramatic.
One thing is true, however, and that's that politicians love power. Forget the rule-in, rule-out game. Once the votes are cast, expect every party to explore every possibility to secure government.
Our Deputy Political Editor Craig McCulloch there. It is 20 minutes to 6. Kia amo tōna mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It is time for the business news now. Ko taku hoa I nai nei, ko Kim Moody. Kim, let's talk KiwiSaver funds. They've had a solid start to the year. Tell us more.
Kia ora, Lisa. Yes, they have. So this will be good news for your KiwiSaver balance. Some new data out today by investment research firm Morningstar showing KiwiSaver assets increased a lot to $91.9 billion in the first quarter, or the first 3 months of this year. Of course, this comes after a pretty volatile time. Anyone with a KiwiSaver keeping a close eye on it might have seen their KiwiSaver funds take a small dip or a big dip last year. Really volatile with the markets and COVID disruptions. So the overall value of KiwiSaver assets actually fell last year. They fell more than $3.6 billion. But there was a positive performance in the last 3 months of this year, in the last 3 months of last quarter rather, and in the first 3 months of this year, which was again confirmed today. What was interesting about this is, and also good news, is all multi-sector funds were back in the black. So ranging from the conservative funds right up to the aggressive and growth funds, they all did well and all posted returns. When I spoke to Greg Bunkle today, he's the data director at Morningstar, he said this is actually really important to note. It's really easy, you have us on every day and we have the day-to-day fluctuations of the market, what's happening in the economy, a lot of issues around rising cost of living, things like that. It's really easy to forget that in the background your KiwiSaver is ticking up over time despite what is happening on this day-to-day period. He said it's really important to note that these returns did go up. And these rates were worth noting. He said the average returns for multi-sector funds, for conservative funds, was 2.9% for the past 3 months. For aggressive funds, that was an average of 5.6%. Also interesting, I thought Greg Bunkle said during, you would have seen during COVID-19 when people were seeing that their KiwiSaver was taking a big hit, people did get a little bit scared, maybe moved their funds from a more aggressive situation to a conservative fund. That was kind of a hair trigger response. These things do tend to smooth out over time. He said the best way to measure it is over a 10-year period, right? These are long-term funds. And he said people have kind of settled down a little bit now. People aren't moving their funds around a bit more. You have to really take a long-term view. And he's actually putting that down to KiwiSaver providers being more informative with their clients about how KiwiSaver works and what it means for you and your fund when these day-to-day things do happen, but over time, what might suit you better. So definitely one to keep a further zoomed out vision of.
And there's developments in the Latitude data breach. Privacy authorities in New Zealand and Australia are teaming up to investigate.
Yeah, so this is that large data breach we've been reporting on since March. More than 14 million Australian and New Zealand driver's licences, passports, other personal details, really important details, were stolen in this massive hack. Some of this data, about 40% of it, was actually fairly old data. It was shared in the past decade with Latitude, so raising some questions there about, maybe how long do firms need to be keeping this data? Latitude, our listeners might know their GEM Visa card, which offers some interest-free deals at some major retailers, the likes of Harvey Norman, Noel Leeming, places like that. So Latitude came out and said the cyber attackers had demanded a ransom. It wasn't going to pay it. And now privacy authorities, both here and in Australia, are teaming up for an inquiry into this hack. The joint inquiry is actually a first with us and our Australian counterparts. Deputy New Zealand Privacy Commissioner Liz McPherson, she says the inquiry will focus on how Latitude was actually hacked, how long the hack lasted before Latitude realised it was actually being hacked, and Latitude's reaction to it. She also said, some strong language around this. She said the breach was significant and appalling. She said the inquiry will look to see if Latitude could have done more. So one to keep an eye on.
And Kim, do take us for a spin around the markets, please.
Yes, so the NZX top 50, it's actually finishing up today, up 0.8% or 98 points to 11,987. The US dollar slipping a little bit, meaning the Kiwi is edging higher. So $1 Kiwi is now buying 63.4 US cents, and our dollar is buying 93.7 Australian and 50 pence.
Thank you, Kim. Ka kite. That's Kim Moody with business news there. It is 16 minutes away from 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaro, do send us your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Getting a bit of chatter on these Air New Zealand bunk beds that they're putting on some long-haul flights. You can book them for up to 4 hours a pop, $150 around about. Haven't settled on the price in the hour. Let us know your thoughts on that one, 2101 on text, and you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time to go to the headlines. Ana ia Evie, mena pita kōrero.
The school at the centre of a caving tragedy yesterday was the subject of an earlier visit by WorkSafe. The incident was recorded in Whangārei Boys High School's Board of Trustee minutes on March the 28th. Checkpoint has spoken to Principal Karen Gilbert-Smith about the accident, but she has declined to comment. The board is meeting tonight to discuss the caving accident when a student became separated from the party that went into the Abbey Caves just before torrential rain hit the area. A West Auckland residents group says it has concerns for homeowners' mental health and well-being following yesterday's storms. Lyle Carter from West Aucklanders Flooding says some homeowners have been affected by extreme weather 5 times in the last 2 years. Retirement village operators say they work hard with residents groups to improve their facilities and are puzzled that the Commerce Commission is investigating complaints of unfair practices. The competition watchdog has confirmed it's investigating whether some contracts could breach the Fair Trading Act. Retirement Villages Association President Graham Wilkinson says its members are committed to complying with the Act and it will fully cooperate with the investigation. And the co-leaders of Te Pāti Māori are surprised National has ruled out working with them after the election, as they thought it had done so already. National leader Christopher Luxon says the parties have no philosophical alignment. But Te Pāti Māori co-leader Rawiri Waititi says it's nothing new from Mr Luxon. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, strong winds in Auckland have reduced the Harbour Bridge to 4 lanes in each direction during peak traffic tonight. Our next news and weather are at 6 o'clock.
Thank you, Evie, for the very serious business of news. I've been chuckling away to myself here. Poor old Evie getting distracted. Reading your feedback on the bunk beds that Air New Zealand is going to put on some long-haul flights. It seems like you've got deep concerns about these things becoming fart chambers. There is no other way of putting it. Farting and snoring, bags not being seated next to the pods, says this person. Oh dear. And someone else says, snoring. Snoring is the other issue that you have raised. Martin and Nelson is wondering whether they'll get credit if they can't go to sleep because someone is snoring. Yes, and $600 for 4 hours potentially is the top price. Other people saying no way would they pay that much for sleeping on a long haul flight. And Wayne's got in touch, and his primary concern is that these pods sound like porter brothel. Thanks for your feedback. Got any reckons on that, Evie, while I gather myself?
I have nothing to say.
Okay, 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Let's get back to the very serious business of other news. To the Coromandel Peninsula now, where they've had their fourth major storm in 5 months. Businesses and locals are feeling the effects of their fragile roading network and the lashing of severe weather. Now, after years without their usual bustling summer period and now winter on the way, they are desperate for some normality. Reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Marika Habazi have the story.
A reprieve from the rain today in Coromandel after yesterday's deluge, bringing their total to 4 storms in just 5 months. At the Source Artist Collective shop in Coromandel town, it's another quiet day for Nigel Sparrow. He says the state of the roading network leaves them extremely vulnerable.
I remember I went up to Auckland not long after the rain, and when I got home it was a bit like I almost spent a couple of days a bit shaky. You know, it was quite emotional because you realise we're really, you know, at risk in terms of access to the whole peninsula.
Businesses down about 40%, but with the closure of State Highway 25A, they are getting a few more Aucklanders passing by en route to their batches. Just down the road, it's a similar story at Weta Cafe. Chef Hannah Ngamani says the storm's destruction of their roads is turning customers away.
The roads are going to close, so people just cancel their trip completely, which then loses a lot of money. My mum works at the information centre in town, and she also notices a massive dip in people who aren't coming anymore.
They still have the support of locals, but are frustrated many aren't making the journey to them, pinning their hopes on next summer to bounce back.
Trickled on top and we're just getting used to busy again, so we're kind of very much hoping this summer will be the blow up we've been waiting for the last 3 years, but I guess we can't really tell.
Further east along the peninsula in Whitianga, Derek Collier from Whitianga Sports Centre is less confident they'll make it through till then.
Our biggest problem, of course, is whether we can survive the next 10 months or whether the roads coming into Whitianga can survive the next 10 months. Because if you've driven over those roads, they've got plenty of issues too. And most of them weren't designed for the kind of traffic that they're taking at the moment.
In January, they've turned over half of what they usually would, thanks to wild weather and roading woes. And many businesses are struggling to get supplies into Whitianga with the uncertainty of the roads.
We've already got some couriers that are refusing to come onto the Coromandel Peninsula at the moment. I've got a parcel that I ordered from one of my suppliers from 19th of last month, and I'm still waiting for it to arrive. It's in transit somewhere.
With winter on its way and a fix for State Highway 25A not coming till early next year, businesses are stuck in limbo for the foreseeable future.
How is this going to be in the future? And there's no answer to that yet, except we're seeing a fairly good sign that it's not going to be, weather's going to be a huge part of life, you know, for us in the future. So, yeah, there's no certainty there.
And the video version of that story will be on our webpage. The tourism industry wants to rebuild better than ever, saying a new era is ahead. More than 1,500 travel delegates are in Ōtautahi for the country's biggest tourism business event, Trends, this week. Tourism reporter Tess Brunton is at the conference.
This week's bad weather has been a stark reminder that any tourism rebuild needs to focus on resiliency. Tourism Minister Pene Whangārei told Trends that recovery from the cyclone has created a lot of challenges for the sector.
One of the ways we can make sure that we can ease the burden locally while also supporting tourism and other economies to get back on their feet in those regions is to invest heavily in the infrastructure that supports that region.
Yesterday, the government committed to building a multi-million-dollar bridge and repairing State Highway 25A to reconnect Coromandel Peninsula after it was decimated by a landslide. Penny Whangārei says making areas more accessible to tourists is one of the ways to support tourism businesses. But part of the industry rebuild is also ensuring tourism is more resilient.
As recent extreme weather events in New Zealand have highlighted, there is an urgent need to prepare for such extreme events. That is why the environment phase of the tourism ITP focuses on 3 key areas: climate change adaptation, climate change mitigation and fostering positive ecological outcomes.
He believes there needs to be a range of tourism offerings, from high-end to budget, but he's pleased to hear some operators have chosen to limit their visitor numbers.
For those who do decide to look towards either capping their visitor numbers, it's not always about seeking high volume or high value, It's also trying to control volume in order to give an offering that they think is going to be of high value, and I think that's a really good way of looking at it.
Today, Air New Zealand announced a multi-billion-dollar investment in new aircraft, more seating and marketing over the next 5 years. Chief Executive Greg Foran says survival mode is done and dusted.
We're out of revive, we're into thrive. We've got our swing back, we're back to all 30 destinations, the planes are up and operating. So yes, I think we can move on from where we were as recently as 6 months ago.
Scott Tasker from Auckland Airport says travel has rebounded faster than expected, but he doesn't believe international seat capacity will reach pre-COVID levels until 2025.
We are at about a 90% recovery of seat capacity, but I think the final 10% is probably the hardest 10%. Getting that final kind of back to 2019 levels requires us to work pretty hard to get some airline partners to add that final 10%.
Tourism Industry Aotearoa Chief Executive Rebecca Ingram unveiled plans for a new regenerative tourism strategy as they head towards 2050.
If we want to rebuild, to flourish and support our regions and communities, to showcase our culture, to protect our environment, not to mention boosting New Zealand's economic stability, we need a great plan.
It's aimed to reduce tourism's carbon footprint, support the industry's workforce, embed Māori perspectives and introduce new funding mechanisms so it can progress its own future.
So we see it very much as a living document. What we have experienced over the last few years illustrates the importance of making sure that we are adapting and evolving as an industry. So the intention is to set a 2050 horizon, likely a 10-year action plan.
Consultation for the industry strategy opens in June, with plans to launch the final strategy in August.
And that report from Tess Brunton. It's 5 minutes away from 6. Kia mau tōne mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. There are concerns the sale of leases for 5 Queenstown Lakes camping grounds to an Australian group may spell the end to the Kiwi camping experience at the sites. But the Queenstown Lakes District Council says they intend to retain ownership of the land and campers will continue to enjoy the places they love. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown and camera operator Nathan McKinnon visited the area.
Doug Fraser has been camping at Glendhu Bay Motor Camp just outside of Wanaka with his family since the late 1940s. It means a lot to him and his whānau.
Very near and dear. So, and the grandkids talk about, coming down, for 6 months of the year. So the parents couldn't go for a holiday anywhere else because the grandkids demand that they come back to Glendhu Bay.
So when he heard rumours while camping there at Christmas that it's potentially going to be sold to Australian company Hampshire Property Group, he had concerns, especially in light of Queenstown Lakes District Council's 2021 camping strategy.
It seemed to be more focused on what financial returns they could get out of the camps, rather than maintaining the Kiwi camping experience. And they talk about joint ventures with private capital and changing different types of camping systems. So, is that code for building chalets on the campsites that we've been camping on for many years? There's a certain nervousness about that.
These Glendhu Bay campers didn't want to share their names, but they are happy to share their concerns about the ownership heading offshore.
Not necessarily just Australian, but any overseas entity. I think it just will take away the Kiwiness of camping.
To see it sold off to an overseas entity wouldn't be good.
It becomes more corporate, and with it, corporate, you've got a whole corporate structure to pay for, and the only way to pay for that is to put their prices up.
Glendhu Bay is leased under a single arrangement alongside the Albertown, Arrowtown, Queenstown and Wanaka motor camps.
Campers are concerned that their piece of paradise may suffer the same fate as the nearby Cromwell Holiday Park. What used to be a summer holiday hotspot is now just rows of houses.
The 5 Queenstown Lakes campsites have been leased and managed by 2 local couples for years, but the death of one of the owners has sparked the need for change. The owners and prospective purchasers did not wish to comment while the application is before the Overseas Investment Office. Bruce Miller, who's also been camping at Glendhu Bay since he was an infant, says as long as the current culture of the site is maintained, he's okay with new ownership.
Really, as long as there are, appropriate constraints on what owners may or may not do, particularly since they're not New Zealanders and don't necessarily fully appreciate the New Zealand camping culture. That would be the main thing I'd be looking for.
But Bruce Miller appreciates such controls are easier said than done.
Not a straightforward sort of a challenge for them really, because it's one thing to say, well, no change, but on the other hand, people do like to know that there are going to be improvements, and there always have been. The native planting around the camp would be an example of that.
The Overseas Investment Office says it received the application regarding the sale of the campsite leases in late October. It won't release the application until after its decision is made. The OIO has received 13 submissions on the proposal and expects to make its decision within the next month. The Queenstown Lakes District Council says it will not be selling the land and they have no say over the buyer of the leases. But they do have control over any changes to prices or infrastructure at the sites, and the camps will continue to be operated in the way residents and visitors love.
And Timothy and Nathan's video version of that story will be on our webpage. OK, it's coming in thick and fast about these Air New Zealand sleeping pods, their bunks. Jenny says, what about snorers? Are they soundproof? That is a concern from many people. Martin and Nelson says, the elephant in the sleep nest room will be snoring. Do you get a credit if you can't sleep because someone is snoring? $150 an hour, says someone. That's $3,600 a day in a hotel. Oh, that's $3,600 a day, I think they're saying, in a hotel. And someone's come up with a new verb, flunk, to fly in a bunk.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Tēnā tātou. Good evening, I'm Evie Ashton. Board of Trustees at Whangārei Boys High School are meeting tonight after yesterday's death of a student during a trip to nearby caves. The body of a student was retrieved early this morning. The group of 15 Year 11 students and 2 adults were in the caves during heavy rain. The coroner and WorkSafe are investigating, and it's come to light that the latter agency visited the school recently following another unspecified serious accident. It was recorded in the school's Board of Trustee minutes on March the 28th. Checkpoint has spoken to Principal Karen Gilbert-Smith about the accident, but she has declined to comment. Security guards are keeping media at a distance from tonight's trustee meeting. Fabiana is the mother of 2 boys at Whangārei Boys High School and told RNZ there are lots of people who are angry, but it was an accident and the staff are feeling awful. She says the community should come together and support one another after this tragedy and give love to the family.
It's pretty heartbreaking. You know, your kid goes to school and you think, I trust that good decisions are going to be made and it's going to be all fine, and then it's something like that can happen and your kid doesn't come home.
Auckland Council says many eastern suburbs of the city were badly hit by yesterday's flash flooding. More than 60 assessors have been out checking hundreds of buildings across the region. The council's manager of building consents, Ian McCormick, says some suburbs have been hit twice in recent months.
The main affected areas from this event were Whangārei, St Heliers and Glendowie, Howick, Takanini and Papakura, Hillsborough and Mount Roskill.
Almost 300 flood-prone properties are slated for a visit. Auckland's City Centre Business Association is concerned the council's larger-than-expected budget hole will result in more severe cuts. The shortfall for the next financial year is expected to reach $375 million, including $50 million in storm costs. Heart of the City Chief Executive, Viv Beck, is concerned core services are at risk.
Thinking about it in the environment of coming out of 3 years of COVID restrictions and what Auckland's been through, we are concerned around a really harsh austerity budget in that context. So that's a concern.
Auckland Council's finance team delivered the budget update in a closed-door workshop with councillors today. Retirement village operators are puzzled that the Commerce Commission is investigating complaints of unfair practices. The competition watchdog has confirmed it's investigating whether some contracts could breach the Fair Trading Act. Retirement Villages Association President Graham Wilkinson says it's been working with its own members and residents groups to improve practices.
So we're surprised an investigation is actually warranted. But regardless, I can tell you now that every member is fully committed to meeting the requirements of the Fair Trading Act, and we'll fully cooperate with the Commerce Commission.
Graham Wilkinson says surveys consistently show 90% of retirement village residents are satisfied or very satisfied. The Prime Minister says Labour will make decisions on areas where it may or may not be able to work with other parties closer to the election. National leader Christopher Luxon has ruled out working with Te Pāti Māori after the election, saying they have differing views on one person, one vote principles. Chris Hipkins wouldn't rule in or out working with anyone, but he says Mr Luxon should consider his comments.
The Māori electorates do operate on the principle of one person, one vote, and I think those who suggest otherwise need to really, consider what the message is that they're trying to convey.
Chris Hipkins says he has a constructive, albeit limited, relationship with Te Pāti Māori at the moment, given Labour's single-party majority. The acting president of the Post-Primary Teachers Association says teacher pay is so bad, some have been forced to use food banks. Speaking to hundreds of striking secondary and area school teachers in front of Parliament today, Chris Abercrombie said teachers' pay isn't keeping pace with the cost of living.
It is not good enough that in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we have teachers going to food banks. And I know this to be true because I've had to do it myself.
Rolling secondary school strikes move to the upper North Island tomorrow. The Court of Appeal has found an officer illegally photographed a man during a random traffic stop, amounting to a breach of the Bill of Rights. Mahia Tameifuna was convicted of aggravated robbery for offending that happened with an associate in November 2019. A few days after the robbery, Tameifuna was in a car when it was randomly stopped by police. An officer took his photo, but the court found there was no lawful reason for it. But despite that, the court allowed the picture to be used as evidence to identify Tameifuna in his subsequent trial for robbery. It says the police impropriety was not done in bad faith, and it led to Tameifuna's conviction for a serious offence. And a lawyer for Donald Trump says he'll appeal the finding of a jury that he sexually abused the magazine writer E. Jean Carroll and defamed her by lying about it. The jury awarded Ms. Carroll almost $8 million in damages. The BBC's Anthony Zocha reports.
After the jury handed down its ruling against Donald Trump, the former president was quick to dismiss the outcome as yet further evidence of a witch hunt by his enemies against him. At the very least, however, this will be a distraction for the former president on the campaign trail. He has a rally in Iowa on Saturday and will appear on a cable news town hall Wednesday night, where he is certain to be questioned about the jury's ruling.
That's the news.
tomorrow on Afternoons with Jesse Mulligan. If you're in the market for a term deposit, Mary Holm wants you to know about something called laddering, which could get you higher returns and protect you from the risk of missing out due to bad timing. She says it might also work with your mortgage. And in sports history, Sarah Walker talks about overcoming a nasty shoulder injury to win silver in the 2012 Olympics, plus other highlights from her incredible BMX career. That's on Afternoons from 1 p.m. tomorrow here on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. In the west, from Northland to Kapiti, also Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Showers, some heavy with possible thunderstorms and hail, gradually easing from Waikato southwards tomorrow. Gisborne to Waded Upper, also Wellington and Marlborough. Mainly fine with the odd shower. Cloud and showers spreading north again tomorrow. Some may be heavy. Nelson, showers spreading from the west today, clearing to fine tomorrow morning. Bulla and Westland, showers, possibly heavy and thundery with hail, clearing from southern Westland this evening and elsewhere tomorrow morning, then fine weather. Canterbury, occasional showers with snow to about 600 metres overnight, clearing from the south tomorrow, apart from a few showers near the coast. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, occasional rain or showers with snow above 400 metres easing tomorrow. And for Kohu, Chatham Islands, showers, some heavy and possibly thundery, easing later tomorrow. The time is coming up to 8 minutes past 6. I will have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Ngā mihi iwi, no mai hoki mai. The government plans to tweak liquor laws so pubs can stay open during Rugby World Cup games that are played outside of normal trading hours. Justice Minister Kiri Allen says the amendment to the Act will give hospitality a much-needed boost during the tournament that kicks off in France in September, meaning it's played in a different time zone. Now, the changes will only be temporary, and eligible licensed premises will have to let police and local councils know if they plan to show matches outside of normal trading hours. Alcohol Health Watch Acting Executive Director Rebecca Williams joins me now. Kia ora, Rebecca, what do you think of this plan?
Oh, kia ora, Lisa and listeners. Again, disappointment, do I have to say, but longer trading hours, extended trading hours are all associated with increased risk and increased outcomes in terms of harm. It seems to fly in the face of the object of the Act in which it's empowered through, which is to minimise alcohol-related harm. So I think, my mind goes back to 2010 when the Law Commission reviewed our laws and came up with a number of recommendations which led to the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act as we know it now. And as I said, it has an object and a purpose of minimising alcohol-related harm. And these decisions, these repeated decisions to provide exemptions to extend trading hours seems to fly in the face of that.
The counter to that would be, Rebecca, can't people go along to the pub, have a quiet drink, a safe drink, watch a game of rugby? What's wrong with that?
Well, that's the other side of the coin. The licensed premises, hospitality, the majority of players in that space provide potentially a safer environment than perhaps non-licensed premises in those late hours. So I think what we've got to keep in mind though is that people may start drinking a lot earlier and continue to drink, and those premises that their patrons are on in those late hours are required to make sure they don't serve to intoxicated patrons nor continue to serve intoxicated patrons. So there's checks and balances on a licensed premise, which you have to say, that's on the positive side. But my heart goes out to those who work in emergency departments and the police who have to pick up the pieces at the end of the day. And these extended trading hours and events are actually associated with a significant increase in drinking and a significant increase in harmful consumption and associated harm.
Rebecca, what would you say about the association between the fact it's a sporting event, so, okay, let's just tweak the law a little bit around drinking so that people can go to the pub during a sports event? What do you make of that association?
It really makes us, I guess we have to ask ourselves, do we have to consume in order to enjoy a sport event? half of the world's adult population don't consume alcohol, and they manage to enjoy cultural and sporting events quite happily without getting intoxicated and without needing to consume alcohol. We've got concerns around the exposure, particularly to younger people who are exposed to the marketing and things around these events. We've been trying hard over many, many years, decades in fact, to try and sort of break the link between alcohol and sport, and particularly around the promotion of it. This seems to me an example of where our laws have suddenly become optional for those with a vested interest. And, we have to ask ourselves, is that okay? And like I said, in 2010, when the Law Commission asked thousands and thousands and thousands of people across communities across New Zealand, they said, no, we need to stop this. And the recommendation was, curb trading hours, restrict the marketing of alcohol around these events particularly. And repeated reviews have come up with the same conclusions. And it feels just like,
Yeah, the government in saying that it's going to do this is also saying that hospitality is going to get a much needed boost during the tournament as a consequence by them making this amendment to the Act. But is it your view that they should not tweak it? Don't change it, leave it how it is. And if the games are outside of normal licensed operating hours, well, then you can stay home and watch it. And if you want a beverage, an alcoholic one, you can do it at home.
Absolutely. Well, to be honest, yes, because we've set our laws. How many other laws do we tweak every now and again because certain groups need to have a different approach? I mean, the law's the law, isn't it? I mean, do we feel like we should chop and change laws every time some group wants a different outcome or a different view? I thought the law was set, and there are times when we do set the pens and papers down and do a proper review. But here we've got, the hospitality industry coming and basically saying to government, oh, change it for us and, just tweak it here. What's to stop every other industry having a say? What's the rights of individuals to expect our laws to be consistent here and our object to be consistent?
Really appreciate your time, Rebecca. That's Rebecca Williams, who's the Acting Executive Director of Alcohol Health Watch. Let us know your thoughts on that one, 2101 on text, or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Should the alcohol laws be tweaked so that during the Rugby World Cup, pubs can stay open at odd hours to accommodate viewers who want to watch the game and maybe have a beverage, an alcoholic one? And next is a bit of a warning. If you are in Auckland, it's around wind in the Harbour Bridge tonight from 6 p.m. tonight. Yep, so we're past that. 6 p.m. until 7 a.m. tomorrow. There is an amber alert warning in place for the Auckland Harbour Bridge with forecast westerly winds of between 75 and 85 kilometres an hour. This is from Waka Kotahi. Says there's potential for winds to briefly rise to 90 to 100 kilometres. That would be a red alert and could come during squally thunderstorms and heavy showers. Winds are expected to remain strong throughout much of Thursday, but at this stage there is a low risk of winds becoming strong enough to signal a red alert. But under amber, speeds are reduced and some lanes are closed on the bridge. Okay, so be aware of that. If it goes to red, they're hoping that's not going to happen, but under a red alert, all lanes on the bridge are closed. And they are asking motorists out there to drive to conditions. Look out for the electronic signboards that are going to tell you exactly what is happening. You can also check Waka Kotahi's website. But at the moment and until 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, amber alert on Auckland Harbour Bridge due to wind forecasts. So you need to slow down. It's 6:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. With free doctors' visits, a boost to welfare and discounts on energy bills, Australia's government says its budget is helping those under the pump. There's more than $20 billion worth of new spending, largely aimed at easing cost of living pressures. As the ABC's Nicole Hegarty reports, doctors are delighted by welfare, but welfare advocates are disappointed.
It's one of the surprises of the budget. A $3.5 billion package to make sure more than 11 million people can get free visits to the GP.
Our Labor government will triple the bulk billing incentive.
By paying doctors 3 times as much to bulk bill families with young children, pensioners and concession card holders, The government is hoping to stop a jump in the number of GPs charging out-of-pocket fees.
And it will ensure that for millions of people, the quality of your health care is guaranteed, not by your credit card, but by your Medicare card.
Doctors are calling it a game changer. And it's not the only big spending boost. JobSeeker, the Youth Allowance and Oz Study are all increasing by $40 a fortnight. But Cassandra Goldie from the Australian Council of Social Service says it's not enough.
JobSeeker tonight is still a poverty payment. And tonight we will still have over 1 million people who won't know whether they can feed themselves 3 times a day. They won't know whether they're going to be able to afford to keep the roof over their head, whether they're going to have to go and sleep in a park.
And the welfare boost has also left Kristen O'Connell from the Anti-Poverty Centre frustrated.
The meagre changes in the budget tonight to welfare payments expose the fact that the government knows the welfare system is deeply inadequate, but that they are utterly unwilling to do what is needed to get 2.5 million people out of poverty.
Bailey Riley, who's the president of the National Union of Students, is also unimpressed.
We've been given crumbs yet again. Youth allowance and Oz Study being raised by $40 a fortnight is an unacceptable increase that still leaves young Australians living far below the poverty line.
The JobSeeker unemployment benefit is going from $50 to $52 a day, or around $733 a fortnight. And the higher rate of JobSeeker, which currently applies to people over 60, will be extended to those over 55, in a bid to help the large numbers of older unemployed women who need support. The government's also stepping in to raise Commonwealth rent assistance payments by 15% for more than 1 million households.
Rent assistance going up by 15% or $31 a fortnight. Young Australians are being left to fend for themselves at a time of a cost of living crisis.
Kristen O'Connell from the Anti-Poverty Centre describes it as a piecemeal change.
An extra few dollars a week in my rent assistance payment isn't going to change the fact that I'm currently paying 83% of my DSP to live in a pretty substandard home.
While the increases fall short of what welfare advocates, unions and businesses recommended, the government still insists it's done its best to help the most vulnerable.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has spoken at a somewhat muted victory parade in Moscow, saying the world is at a turning point with a real war being waged against Russia. The annual celebrations held to mark the defeat of Hitler's forces were scaled back because of the conflict in Ukraine. Mr. Putin says his forces are fighting against a cult of Nazis who want to destroy his country. The BBC's Steve Rosenberg reports.
За победу! Ура!
It is the day Russia likes to project power and invincibility. Despite security concerns, the annual Victory Day parade went ahead on Red Square to commemorate the defeat of Nazi Germany. But the war in Ukraine made this feel a very different 9th of May. The 80-year-old T-34, the only tank on display here. Modern tanks are normally a feature of the Victory Day parade. Not this year. There was no military flypast. It was cancelled. And there were fewer soldiers here than normal. Watching from the stands, Russia's commander-in-chief, Vladimir Putin, is under intense pressure. His invasion of Ukraine has not gone to plan. But he continues to blame the West.
Today, once again, civilization is at a decisive turning point. A real war has been unleashed against our homeland. We have repulsed international terrorism in the past. Now we will protect the people of Donbass, and we will ensure our security.
And security has become a problem for the Kremlin. Less than a week ago, it was attacked by drones. The Russian authorities blame Ukraine. For these, too, the recent string of drone attacks across Russia and Russian-occupied Crimea, and bombs targeting railways and power lines. Citing security concerns, some Russian regions had cancelled local Victory Day events. The Kremlin will be relieved that the Moscow parade passed off without incident. But it wasn't the showcase of military might the Russian authorities wanted.
Protests have erupted in Pakistan in several cities after the arrest of former Prime Minister Imran Khan while he was following court proceedings relating to charges of corruption. The 70-year-old former international cricket star became the Prime Minister in July 2018, promising to fight corruption and fix the economy. But last year he fell out of favour with the powerful military and was then forced out of office by a no-confidence motion. The current coalition government has long been calling for Mr Khan's arrest on charges of corruption. Mr Khan has denied all charges. The BBC's Caroline Davis has more.
This was the moment Imran Khan was arrested. Awaiting trial, paramilitary troops shatter glass. Batons, camera phones and confusion. Marched to a waiting car in a sea of riot police. After 2 failed attempts to arrest the former Prime Minister, the authorities were taking no chances. The police say they arrested Mr Khan on charges of corruption. The Chief Justice of Islamabad's High Court has said that the arrest was legal. But anger was already palpable in some parts of the country.
This is one of the main roads out of Islamabad, that way to Islamabad and that way to Rawalpindi. Protesters here have come out in their hundreds to show how angry they are at the arrest of Imran Khan.
Today's arrest left some without hope for Pakistan's political system.
I don't know. Whatever, let there be anarchy, let there be chaos. If there is no Imran, there is nothing left in Pakistan.
Other protests were directed at one group, Pakistan's powerful military. Imran Khan has repeatedly criticised its leadership. In Lahore, they broke into the city's highest military official residence, setting it on fire and even taking the army's peacocks. In Rawalpindi, they breached the gates of the army's headquarters. Pakistan hasn't seen such open attacks by the public on its army in decades. Pakistan is due to hold a national election this year. It's politically polarised. Imran Khan has been accused of whipping up his supporters to avoid the law. We last saw violent protests by his supporters in March. From his armoured car on his way to court, Mr Khan told me then that he thought the authorities intended to jail him.
Putting in prison means that they will keep me out of the election race right till the end of the elections. So I won't be able to campaign. That's the whole thing.
Imran Khan's party tonight said that they would challenge the arrest in court and tried to distance themselves from any acts of violence. But they intend protests to continue. The country is already caught in a deeply divisive political power struggle.
It's said that drinking red wine can have some health benefits. Turns out it helped a woman survive when she was lost in the Australian wilderness. In a remarkable story of survival, Lillian Ip was found by a police helicopter after surviving for 5 days in rural Victoria. After she took a wrong turn and got stuck in mud, Lillian survived on a few snacks and a bottle of wine. And as Adam Hegarty found out, she doesn't even drink.
A mother's embrace, Lillian Ip thought she'd never feel again. For good reason. 5 days lost, cold and alone in the Alpine high country. This, her rescue, her moment of euphoria.
I was thinking, oh my God. First thing that came in mind was thinking, water and a cigarette. Thank God the women policewomen, they have a cigarette.
The 48-year-old's sense of humour and life intact, safe and home in Cheltenham. Out here, her stranded hatchback was her shelter. No food, no water, no phone reception, and no logical way out of terrain similar to this, the closest town, a 60-kilometre walk away.
And I thought that I was going to die there. My whole body shut down on Friday.
Found on Friday, lost last Sunday. Holidaying in Bright and en route to Lake Dartmouth, Lillian realised a hill was too steep. After a U-turn, her car got bogged. She waited for help with nothing but blankets, a fruit box and a gift bottle of wine. Her only hydration. And Lillian's no drinker.
No, not at all.
And you had to drink it?
I had to drink it.
How was
I've got no
taste?
choice.
By the 4th day, so convinced she wasn't going to survive, she even wrote a letter to her family, telling them she loved them and to not cry for her. But then, the very next day, the sound of police overhead.
It was amazing. I was about to give up. Instead,
reunited bliss.
Thank you for not giving up on me.
Love Lillian. Well, finally tonight we go to Virginia in the US, where a horse sanctuary has hitched wagons with a local school to give students with learning disabilities some special training outside of the classroom. Not only has it been a success for the students, it's good for the horses, who are all rescue animals. Dryden Quigley has more.
I just like all horses.
Jason Wilton Carter is a Louisa County high schooler in the special education program. He's been coming to the farm for months.
We see what Miss Rhonda and Mr. Bill need us to do. Then we help them out. And what else they don't have for us to do, we just start petting horses.
Miss Rhonda is Rhonda Vina Laporte, the co-owner of Serenity Farm Equine Sanctuary. All of the horses here are rescues.
Some of them are law enforcement seizures. They were starvation or neglect or abuse cases. Some are owner surrenders for a myriad of reasons.
The horses and students are both learning to trust.
They teach the horses teach them.
Most of them have little to no experience with horses.
The first time I was a little scared, but
this time you were a pro.
I guess so.
Now the students are riding with ease, some even taking the reins themselves. But it took work to get there.
They're terrified of the animals, and then as they learn to get near them and groom them and help them, they get more and more attached. Each one has kind of a favorite horse or donkey. And then to see them get up on the horses when some of them didn't even want to be around them at the beginning of the year is really cool.
Students learn everything from building a barn to saddling a horse. Not all students will go on to work with animals in the future, so the skills they learn can be taken to any job.
One of the most rewarding things is to see one of these kids around the community years and years down the road or whatever, and they're working and they're successful largely because of what they were able to do during their final years at school through this program.
As a senior, it's Jason's last day, but he says he's taking away new skills.
Riding horses, helping other people, and being kind to other people.
We'll see you next time. We'll go riding.
What a gorgeous story. Let's have some final words from you. Feedback on the government planning to amend liquor laws so that pubs can open during the Rugby World Cup later in the year. This person says we should be breaking the link between drinking and sport, not changing laws to promote it. On the other side of the coin, though, this person says Rebecca Williams from Alcohol Health Watch assumes people going to a pub to watch a rugby game are all going to get drunk. Such toss. All this amendment to the law does is make it possible for pubs to open while the RWC games are on in different time zones. Same rules apply. They can't serve intoxicated people. Someone else says alcohol causes health, family and societal problems. We should minimise its importance in everything to help people be able to live without it. And that one from Melissa. On the subject of Air New Zealand, the planet's burning up, our homes are flooding, climate change, global warming are accelerating. The airline industry is talking about increasing capacity and pouring yet more carbon emissions into the atmosphere. This is craziness. Someone else told me off, though, for asking about emissions. Anyway, that is about all we have time for this evening. Late News team's going to keep you updated throughout the evening. And ko te kaupapa tuatahi pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. First up, we'll be looking at face blindness, a strange condition which may affect as many as 100,000 New Zealanders. Super interesting. So do tune in at 5 a.m. tomorrow. Have a wonderful evening. Kia pai tōpō. We'll catch you again tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening, I'm Evie Ashton. Security guards are keeping media at a distance from tonight's board meeting at Whangārei Boys High after yesterday's death of a student during a trip to nearby caves. A mother of two boys at the school says some parents are angry but are rallying to support each other and the boys' whānau. Almost 300 flood-prone properties are slated for a visit by Auckland Council inspectors following yesterday's storm. Striking secondary school teachers say they're having to go to food banks to get by. And a Jetstar flight to Dunedin has landed safely at Christchurch after being diverted following unconfirmed reports it was hit by lightning. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
This morning on First Up, it was wet Groundhog Day for West Auckland as the rain smashed the north once again.
People shouldn't have to go through this. You should feel safe in your own house, and I don't.
The flood that we had at Grand Anniversary weekend has been so detrimental on my wife that she's actually still off work for stress relief because of it, and she's down at the house today watching the water level rise.
And regional community groups swung into action around the region.
So we had about 3 people left who needed to go beyond Wellsford and Kaiwaka, so they stayed on, but we managed to billet them out to just people in the community.
Download First Up the podcast or join me, Nathan Rariri, weekday mornings live from 5 on RNZ National.
Paul Mardier, it is 29 minutes to 7. I'm Evie Ashton and it's time for Trending Now. On the detail tonight, New Zealand's cavalier attitude towards workplace safety is taking a grim toll, largely on young men involved in dangerous trades.
Every worker's entitled to go to work and return home. And unfortunately this year, 11 haven't. And that's a disgrace. And it's a sad indictment on this industry.
Unions are concerned that the building and infrastructure boom is putting more pressure on businesses and that health and safety measures are falling by the wayside.
There is a portion of New Zealand businesses and New Zealand business owners that outright exploit their workers. They don't care about them, they don't look after them, and they don't take health and safety seriously.
There's a lot of growth in the construction industry, which means accidents like this are happening all the time, you know.
New Zealand kills 4 times as many workers as the UK and twice as many workers as Australia. We have this she'll be right attitude that we are willing to accept a level of harm that other countries just won't accept.
I'm Alexia Russell, and today on The Detail, a look at our cavalier attitude to workplace safety in the wake of an horrific case involving a teenage boy who will never be the same again. A Nelson Marine Engineering Company has been ordered to pay $340,000 after a teenage apprentice suffered a brain injury at work. That teenager, 18-year-old Brooke Palmer, was using a volatile solvent to clean the engine bay of a large boat in July 2019 at Amex Limited, based at Port Nelson. He'd had no training on working with hazardous substances. WorkSafe CEO Phil Parks says they were called in to investigate.
They'd asked a young apprentice to do some work on a boat to clean the engine using highly hazardous solvents, and they hadn't taken proper precautions to keep the apprentice safe. So we investigated that incident where the employee, this young apprentice, had suffered really serious health consequences, and so we laid charges and prosecuted the company for not complying with its health and safety obligations.
2 years later, Amex pleaded guilty in the Nelson District Court to the charges WorkSafe laid. The company was fined $275,000 and ordered to pay $50,000 emotional harm reparation and $15,000 in consequential losses. But that's not the end of the story.
During our investigation into this particular incident, we became aware of allegations of another incident similar that had happened previously. And at the time, the company denied that there was any previous incident, so we weren't able to take it any further. My understanding of what's happened since then is that we have new information come to light that says actually there was information about a previous incident and that the people at the company had misled our investigators and lied to cover up a previous incident, which obviously we take very, very seriously.
In what Phil Parks describes as a brazen decision, the business had destroyed key documents to cover up the previous similar incident. WorkSafe called in the police, and Brooks' bosses, brothers Stephen and William Sullivan, were last month found guilty of attempting to pervert the course of justice. They'll be sentenced in July. Phil Parks says the breathing in of dust and fumes is one of WorkSafe's key areas for enforcement.
There is about 750 to 950 fatalities every year in New Zealand from occupational disease. These are things like asbestos, like breathing in chemicals, and really that toll is utterly unacceptable. So 750 to 950 Kiwis every year being killed by this kind of thing. And in this situation, the company hadn't done what it was supposed to do, and it didn't keep its workers safe.
And did that make it sort of imperative to you that you got a result in this case?
Yeah, look, we take action where either there's a very high risk of injury or, in this case, where a really serious injury was occurred. And, of course, it makes it worse that this was a young apprentice who was vulnerable in the workplace.
And young workers are particularly vulnerable.
Look, that's right. Men tend to suffer more injury than women, and that's because of their profile. They tend to work in these higher risk industries, more manual labour, more construction, more forestry. And young workers in particular are vulnerable because they don't always have the self-confidence to say that they don't want to do something if it's dangerous. Often they can be scared to speak up because they're on apprenticeships and they don't want to lose their job. And of course there are other vulnerable communities like immigrants who don't have English as a first language who are also overrepresented in these statistics. So really the job here is for every business owner and every supervisor to not treat workers equally. Whether you're a new apprentice, whether you don't speak English as a first language, whether you're lacking confidence, it's really the obligation on the business to make sure that people are fully trained and looked after when they're at work so we don't have these tragic events.
Because is there a balance? I mean, a lot of these companies would say there's too much regulation, there's too much attention paid to health and safety, it doesn't mean anything. I mean, cases like this, I guess, prove otherwise.
That's right. So I talked about 750 to 950 people being killed in New Zealand every year from occupational disease exposures. On top of that, there's another 80 to 100 being killed in acute injuries like falling off ladders. So overall, to put this into perspective, up to 1,000 Kiwi workers every year are being killed in the workplace. So anyone that says health and safety is about wrapping people in cotton wool or it's gone too far needs to look long and hard at those statistics because those are unacceptable statistics. These people's families are suffering huge tragic loss from businesses not taking good care of their employees.
They're actually astounding statistics. I mean, do they include people who suffer lung disease long term and die of lung cancer, that kind of thing, or are they strictly at work industrial accidents?
So 80 to 100 is at work industrial accidents where the injury happens at the time. 750 to 950 is an estimate of those long-term consequences. So we know that breathing in chemicals, breathing in dusts, exposure to asbestos is killing hundreds and hundreds of Kiwis every year. And you're right, one of the problems with that is somebody would get exposed if they're 17 and they're 18 and they don't feel any immediate consequences. 5, 10, 15 years later, they're suffering from cancer, they're suffering from strokes, they're suffering from heart disease. And we need to stop that because we are killing and harming far too many New Zealanders.
In other words, she won't be right.
That's exactly right. The exposure happens early in teens and the harm happens later. And that means it's really hard for people to see the harm that's occurring. Many businesses do care about their employees, and some don't even know that they're exposing people to these harmful substances. But in this particular case, they knew exactly what they were doing and they were reckless, and I'm glad they've been held to account.
Yeah, getting back to Amex again, it was fairly obvious from the reporting on it that your investigators had an inkling there was something going on with this initial incident. Does WorkSafe have enough or strong enough powers to get to the nub of those things?
Yeah, look, I'm very confident with both the powers that we've got under our legislation and the excellent job that my investigators do. In this particular circumstances, they did everything correctly. But if a perpetrator deliberately destroys evidence, then there's always a limit to what we can find in terms of our standard investigation. The good thing about this was post the investigation, we did get new information which was able to substantiate our inkling, and then we were able to work with police to take action. So I'm very confident in the job we do, and I think what this case shows is crime doesn't always pay. So these people took a chance, they destroyed evidence, and they got caught.
Must have been galling when you heard the initial sentence to find that they'd got a 10% reduction for not having any previous incident.
Yeah, look, I mean, the fine that the courts give out is up to them. So our job as WorkSafe is to try and prevent these things happening in the first place. Where we can't do that, we will hold people to account, and then the court goes through its process. At the time, the court wouldn't have known about this other issue, but as you can see now through the police proceedings, the court will catch up with these, and we're waiting for sentencing for that process.
Yeah, in Amex's case, they had a whistleblower. You know, they had a guy who was prepared to stand up and say, I just can't go along with this kind of behaviour. You know, he was told about it and he resigned straight away and went to the police. Do you get much of that? You know, also, you know, there were cases in the past where the victim's mother has gone to you.
We do get that. So, as I said before, it's not common across all New Zealand businesses. Many New Zealand businesses do a really good job of caring for their workers. But in those businesses where there is an active will to not look after and exploit their workers, we often do get either the workers or their health and safety reps or their union reps or their whānau coming to us. And if anyone's listening today, I'd strongly encourage them to do that. If you don't think that your family member or your workers are being treated well, if you think the company is not doing what it's supposed to, then you can go to our website and lodge a complaint and we will look into it.
In the last few years, there's been a big push for more apprentices, particularly in the construction industry, which is a potentially dangerous industry to work in. Have there been other recent cases where apprentices, you know, terrible things have happened to them because of the slackness or the attitude of their bosses?
Yes, we've had one fatality each year for the last 3 years in the construction industry. So we can't be sure whether they were apprentices, but we do know these were young, vulnerable workers. And we do know that construction is a dangerous industry, and we do know that they need to improve their performance. So because the labour market is tight, because we are sponsoring more apprentices to go into trades, then that risk does grow. So the call out here is apprentices are not cheap, low-value labour that can be put at risk. They're the future generation, and companies who take apprentices on need to recognise that they have a responsibility to train them and look after them.
Professor John Tukey specialises in construction management at AUT, the Auckland University of Technology. I asked him how we're preparing our youngsters for work in these dangerous industries.
I would say broadly not adequately enough. The reality is that we're dealing with a big, heavy industry that has a tendency to bite you very quickly when things go wrong. We tend to put an awful lot of emphasis on the ability of our young apprentices. We tend to assume that they have almost an immediate skill set and an immediate grasp from the beginning. And unfortunately, the vast majority of companies who are dealing with construction, they're usually very small companies who don't necessarily have the infrastructure necessary to be able to actually present a comprehensive training schedule of health and safety content, etc., in order to prep them for their work. So they get thrown at the deep end so quickly. And obviously the tendency of particularly young men is to say, oh yeah, I could do that. No problem. I can do that. And of course, that's where it all goes horribly wrong.
Generally, it is young men, isn't it? I mean, they tend to be the characteristics of young men. They lack in fear. They tend not to be as mature as women. They don't listen often very well. Is there, a case for people who employ these kids to send them to a health and safety workshop for a couple of weeks first?
It would certainly be a beneficial undertaking for sure. There's a lot of work that's the BCITO and similar undertake in order to provide an overview, but getting some form of continuity and consistency, because don't get me wrong, there's some very good companies who do a great job of inducting youngsters into the trades, and that's great.
Big firms tend to be mindful of the reputational risks of accidents in their workplaces and the social expectations of getting their employees home in one piece. But John Tukey says small firms are a different story.
Let's say you've got 5 guys, a couple of transit vans, you take on an apprentice. Okay, who's going to be responsible for dealing with that? Looking after the day-to-day skills training. Because what happens very quickly is that the individual concerned, the young tradie, will get thrown into fetching and carrying stuff. They will get thrown into doing basic tasks, and they will gradually be expected to do more and more. But the formal skills training component, that they'll have maybe day release with BCITO colleges and so on to build the actual practical skills in terms of what technically they've got to do. But they still need day-to-day supervision with somebody, not exactly holding the hand, but not far off, in order to make it all work and make it work consistently. And that, when you're dealing with a small organisation, is extraordinarily difficult to achieve. It's not that they're sanguine, it's just that they recognise what they can and can't realistically deal with. So if you impose significant legislative requirement on them, then they'll just get to a point where they'll say, well, it's just too hard for us to take on an apprentice. And this is the classic pawns of the dilemma at that point. We need more better trained people, not less. And we don't want to create an internal market where those people who do commit themselves to training get grazed on by those who don't, and that's the inevitable consequence of making it too hard. So, there is a very strong case to say that there needs to be more, trade school type of content available where you can get folks in there. And for the future, we actually need people in these trades going forward, and we should be investing in that future. Unfortunately, there tends to be more of a hope of individuals taking the initiative rather than we as a society taking the initiative.
What about the kids themselves? Are they sort of too eager to get on with the job, do you think, that they're sleeping through the inductions?
I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think there's enthusiasm, there's a great deal of willingness to get stuck in and all that sort of stuff. And there's most certainly arguably a macho culture, which is no worries, we can do that. Sweet as, get stuck in. We're not necessarily all the skills are in place. As I say, the industry is formulated by the use of tools which have a tendency to bite, and the training needs to be good from the get-go. From an initial, how do you plug it in? How do you switch it on? How do you measure? How do you cut? And how do you do all these things? But unfortunately, a lot of companies, they tend to use these young apprentices almost as formal labour, literally from the get-go. And that is a recipe for over-expectation, over-commitment, and unfortunately, very negative outcomes.
Well, I guess if they're paying someone from the get-go, they need to get some measure of return from them straight away.
Exactly, and this unfortunately is not going to go away anytime soon. Culturally, the industry is notorious for this. We expect a pound of flesh across the board. We expect everybody to pull their weight almost as immediately as they can, and unfortunately, that leads to very negative consequences as a result.
Do we need some sort of shake-up so that employers recognise the sort of lack of skills in these kids?
Well, I think objectively they do understand the lack of skills. And, the counter argument is one that's, well, we've always approached it in this way. We've always given youngsters, the opportunity to get hands-on at an early stage, learn the trade. And the outcomes have been uniformly pretty good. However, increasingly, we're dealing with a population that are not as practical. Very often they've not been exposed to parents using tools and things like this in the home, because increasingly the definition of doing it yourself is assembling a set of drawers or something that's flat packed from a store. That's not a high level of tool use or anything else. And as a result, inevitably kids if they don't get exposed by their parents utilizing tools and kit and equipment and so on at an early age, it's most unlikely they're going to pick up the practical skills very quickly. So, we have to accept the fact that we're living in a post-hands-on world in which, everybody and his dog might be really good at PlayStation, but aren't necessarily good at spanners, hammers, knives and tools. It's a different world we're living in now.
It's not like the Mitre 10 ad.
What are you doing this weekend? I'm putting up a retaining wall. Do it yourself? No, I'm going to get some broken. Oh, come on, mate, do it yourself.
Back to Phil Parkes.
We work really hard with schools and with industry training organisations. So what we're trying to do is work at both ends. So we work with the construction industry already about how to improve standards all across the construction industry, including training apprentices. But what we're also doing is working with schools, with colleges, with industry training organisations to make sure that when young people go into the workforce, they understand health and safety, they do feel confident to speak up, and if they are concerned, they know how to raise a complaint with their health and safety rep or their union. Because what we know about health and safety is it's a shared responsibility. We know the businesses have to step up and have to provide better care, but we also need the apprentices to feel confident to speak up, and they don't always do that.
Well, and to be sensible too, I guess. I mean, it is a little bit of a two-way street here.
Yeah, and there are obligations on workers to follow reasonable management directions. For example, if a business says an apprentice must wear a mask and the apprentice won't wear a mask, then we can step in and take action against the worker. But I've got to be clear, that's very few and far between. Most incidents that we investigate, the worker was acting sensibly, they were following instruction, and they just weren't well looked after.
What happens when you get a case where there's a very small firm, they say they can't afford the protective gear, they don't have the time to give the proper briefing, they're not really clear on the regulations? Is that something that happens often?
Well, there's a lot of small businesses in New Zealand. About 97% of the economy is small and medium-sized enterprises. So a lot of the industry businesses that we deal with are at the smaller end. And as far as we're concerned, that's no excuse. So if you can't afford to run a safe business where you look after your employees, then you can't afford to be in business. So we don't accept the fact that it couldn't be afforded or it's a small company as an excuse. Whether you have 1 employee, 10 employees or 1,000 employees, your obligation is to look after them, train them, do a risk assessment and check that they're okay. We're actively encouraging young children into trades. We're advertising, we're creating more apprenticeships in New Zealand and selling it as a good career option. And of course it can be, provided they're looked after. But to encourage them into an industry and then expose them to risks like brake fluid, to expose them to electrical hazards, to not give them the correct protective equipment is absolutely unacceptable, because not only for the apprentice themselves, but the impact on their broader whānau is just completely unacceptable. The impact goes long beyond the prosecution. So the colleagues and the friends have an ongoing impact because they've lost a workmate. The individual has huge ongoing impacts in terms of their health. The whānau have ongoing impacts in terms of either losing a relative or having to adjust to a relative that's not in work anymore. And of course, the business has an impact. It's not just the financial impact. They have a reputational impact. And we find that a lot of companies that we prosecute do go out of business. Now, that can either be a good thing because they're not harming people, or it can put legitimate businesses off from starting a new business, which we don't want. So the answer to this is really clear. If you're going to run a business, put people at the centre of the business. Don't take shortcuts. Invest in your people and look after them. Not only will you be profitable, but you won't get prosecuted and you won't cause human harm to vulnerable people.
Does that require a major change of attitude on our part, though, as a nation, a New Zealand kind of trait?
I think it does. So we've got statistics that New Zealand kills 4 times as many workers as the UK and twice as many workers as Australia. And we know that has been adjusted for a different population size, it's been adjusted for our culture, it's been adjusted for our industry representation. So there is something broader about us as Kiwis, that we have this she'll be right attitude, that we are willing to accept a level of harm that other countries just won't accept. And I think that does require businesses, workers, and us as WorkSafe to change the way we do work in New Zealand.
The reality is that if you wish to have a fruitful career and a well-paid career, actually getting involved in the trades is definitely the way to go. And it's one of the reasons why, particularly for the future of the building industry, we need to create the conditions whereby not only is it very clear that there is a great career outcome that's going to be delivered by getting involved in the trades in the first instance, but in the second instance, we're actually looking after and valuing the asset that is that individual and making sure that they have every opportunity to get to old age without damaging themselves as a result of the job choice. And this is non-negotiable. I mean, it's like every other aspect of health and safety at work. We have a fundamental responsibility to ensure that our staff, firstly, have the opportunity to work, and secondly, have the opportunity to go home in one piece, having done a good day's work. We can't have it where we're losing people and losing their ability to be functional in society or have their career or whatever it may be, just as a result of a job accident that could have been easily prevented by some decent training.
Tēnā koe, Alexia. That was the detail for tonight. Now it's time for our report from Parliament. Here's the House with Johnny Blades.
Talofa lava, I'm Johnny Blades and you're with the House. MPs have agreed to a motion on the estimates for officers of Parliament. Basically, the motion is Parliament telling the government how much to fund the Ombudsman, the Auditor-General and the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, the three entities whose job it is to apply independent scrutiny to the government's actions, including its use of public funds, legal accountability and environmental stewardship. The matter of how much these three entities require in order to do their work is discussed beforehand by the cross-party Officers of Parliament Committee. Speaking on the motion, the Finance Minister Grant Robertson said the work of the entities had been significantly complicated by the pandemic, especially the Auditor-General.
All three officers of Parliament are reporting an increasingly complex, changing and demanding environment that puts additional pressure upon resources. The Auditor-General is facing larger than usual deficits over the next 3 years, which the committee inform us is due to increasing audit complexity, mostly relating to COVID-19, pressure on auditors' capacity and availability, and audit costs rising faster than audit fees, while Audit New Zealand works to increase its staffing. The committee, therefore, have agreed that a non-recoverable capital injection totalling